Chapter 4. Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments, and then she began to look around the room. She had never seen a room at all like it, and thought it curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry, with a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses, dogs, ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of a deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land, which seemed to have no trees at all on it, and to look rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out of the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there," she said. "Yes, that's the moor," she said with a good-natured grin. "Does thee like it?" "No," said Mary. "I hate it." "That's because thou art not used to it," Martha said, going back to her hearth. "Thou thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it." "Do you?" inquired Mary. "Oh, aye, that I do," answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. "I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with growing things, and it smells sweet. It's fair lovely in the spring and summer when the gorse and broom and heather is in flower. It smells of honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and skylarks make such a nice noise humming and singing. I wouldn't live away for the moor for nothing." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she had been used to in India were not in the least like this. They were servile, and they did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were their equals. They made salams, and they called them protector of the poor, and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry. She wondered a little what this girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not slap back, if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. "You are a strange servant," she said from her pillows, rather haughtily. Martha sat up on her heels with her blacking brush in one hand. She laughed, without seeming the least out of temper. "Eh? I know that," she said. "If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have even been one of the under housemaids. I might have been let be the scullery maid, but I'd never have made it upstairs. I'm too common, and I talk too much Yorkshire. But this is a funny house for all it's so grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress except Mr. Pitcher and Miss Medlock and Mr. Craven, and he won't be troubled about anything when he's here, and he's nearly always away. Miss Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she could never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses." "Are you going to be my servant?" Mary asked, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub her grate again. "I'm Miss Medlock's servant," she said stoutly, "and she's Mr. Craven's. But I'm to do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit, but you won't need much waiting on." "Who is going to dress me?" demanded Mary. Martha sat up on her heels again and stared. She spoke in a broad Yorkshire in her amazement. "Cannot thou dress thyself?" she said. "I don't know what you mean. I don't understand your language," Mary said. Oh, hey, I forgot, Martha said. Miss Medlock told me I'd have to be careful or you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes? No, answered Mary quite indignantly. I never did in my life. My Aya dressed me, of course. Well, said Martha, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent, it's time thou should learn. Thou cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on thyself a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools. What with nursing and being washed and dressed and took out to walk as if they was puppies. It is different in India, Mistress Mary said disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not at all crushed. "Ay, I can see it's different," she answered, almost sympathetically. "I dare say it's because there's such a lot of native peoples there. When I heard you was coming from India, I thought you was going to be a native person too." Mary sat up in bed, furious. "What?" she said. "What? You thought I was a native? You daughter of a pig?" "Whoa," Martha said. "Who are you calling names?" she said. "You needn't be so vexed. That's not no way for a young lady to talk. I've got nothing against natives. I've never seen one, and I was fair pleased to think that I was going to get to see one close. When I come in to light your fire this morning, I crept up to your bed and pulled back the covers real careful to look at you. And there you was," she said disappointedly, "white as I am, only that you're so yeller." Mary did not even try to control her rage and her humiliation. "You thought I was a native? You dared? You don't know anything about natives. They are servants who salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything." She was in such a rage and felt so helpless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly lonely and so far away from everything that she understood and which understood her. And she threw herself face downward on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that the good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and she bent over her. "Ay, you mustn't cry like that there," she begged. "You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything, just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop a-crying." There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and her sturdy way, which she had a good effect on Mary, and she gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. "It's time for thee to get up now," she said. "Miss Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and the tea and the dinner into the next room to this, and it's been made into a nursery for thee. And I'll help thee on with thy clothes if thou get out of bed, if the buttons are at the back and thou cannot button them up thyself." When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Miss Medlock. "Those are not mine," she said. "Mine are black." She looked the thick white wool coat and the dress over and added with cool approval, "Those are far nicer than mine." "These are the ones thou must put on," Martha answered. "Mr. Craven ordered Miss Medlock to get them in London. He said, 'I won't have a child dressed in black wandering around like a lost soul,' he said. It would make the place sadder than it is. Put some color on her.' And Mother said she knew just what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold back with herself either." "I hate black things," said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. "Why doesn't thou put on thy own shoes?" she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. "My ayah did it," she answered. "It was the custom." She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing that their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom." And one knew that that was the end of the matter. Well, it had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she'd begun to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things that were quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things that she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick things up and to put them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves, and on the younger ones who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things.